Welcome to the Mind Muse podcast. I'm your host, Christie Turley, and today Miriam Schulman is joining me, and we'll be talking about ways to master anxiety and create calm even when you're in times of uncertainty or disruption. Now, this is something that Miriam knows quite a bit about because she witnessed the 9/11 attacks. She was also in the World Trade Center when it was bombed back in the 90s. And she actually has a lot of good tips about this. She's a super creative human being. She has a heart of gold. And she has a lot of tips that I feel like are really, really going to help you today. So, Miriam is a watercolor and mixed media artist for over 20 years now, and she is the founder of the Inspiration Place, which is an online art class website. She abandoned her hedge fund career, which we'll talk about a little bit, after she witnessed 9/11, and she went on to work on her art full time eventually, a circuitous route to her art. And she's totally debunked the starving artist myth, and she teaches other artists how to really get their gift out there and get paid for it. So she's been published in a lot of art magazines like The Art of Man, Art Journaling Magazine, and she's a regular contributor to Professional Art Magazine. And she also has her own podcast. So if anything like this sounds interesting to you, then go ahead and check out her Inspiration Place podcast. So let's dive in and start talking about all these different ways that we can master anxiety and create calm in our lives. All right, welcome, Miriam.
Thanks for having me, Christy. It's so exciting to be here.
Yes. So we're living in some interesting times right now. We're, depending on when you're listening to this, we're either in the middle of a huge global shift or we're in the aftermath of that global shift. And it'll probably take a couple of years at least to shake it out, right? And Miriam is so interesting in so many ways, but tell us a little bit about your story about 9/11 and also working in the World Trade Center and how things feel a little bit similar right now.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, for your listeners, just so you know, I'm 51. That's how I'm old enough to have been in the World Trade Center.
She does not look at it. I'm looking at her and she looks not a day over 35.
Oh my gosh. It's going to look like a few more weeks of this quarantine, Christy. I mean, I'm going to look like the crypt keeper. My false eyelashes have been falling out one by one. I cry every time I see it in the sink, and my roots are growing out. But anyway.
And you're in the epicenter too. Like this
That's what I'm saying. No, and now I've been spraying my roots I have white roots. I've been spraying it with spray. I have to go online. As soon as we're done with this, I'm getting more spray. And I'm also researching any black market hairdressers, because you're not legally supposed to have anybody come to your house, even like right. One-on-one. I don't care anymore.
It's like doing a drug deal. It's like sticking in the back.
Exactly. It's like the drug deal or the back alley abortion. I need this. And I don't care, and I will pay for it. It's like
so funny. Yes,
you gotta have a sense. You have to have a sense of humor through all of this. You just do.
You do.
Yes. Okay. So, and I think we've taken care of our toilet paper needs because we discovered that my husband's paper supply. Well, he told me the other day that we have basically 3 weeks of toilet paper, and then we're done in the house. So his office supply company will actually deliver toilet paper. He just has to be there to receive anyway. We don't need to discuss our toilet needs, but we have a plan in place.
Comic relief though during this whole thing. Like, why is it zombie apocalypse over toilet paper right now? Like,
who knew that this is going to be so important?
Non-perishable foods. It's like toilet paper.
Okay. Well, thank God I'm a vegetarian and nobody likes the food that I eat. Like I'm not no one's fighting with me over the broccoli and the pinto beans. So, okay, back to what we were talking about. So I am old enough to, not only was I working during 9/11, but I actually was working during the first bombing of the Trade Center back in 92. And it was the lessons I learned then that kind of gave me a different mindset when 9/11 happened. Can I take the story back that
Yes,
far?
please.
Okay. So in 92, I was not an artist. I don't know how you're introducing me during the intro, but right now I am a full-time artist and I teach online art classes, and I also help artists build their own businesses selling art. But at the time in 92, I worked for Salomon Brothers in a very intense trading company, pretty much like a Michael Lewis novel. So the actual people he writes about that's who I interacted with. So during the first bombing, I happened to be eating lunch in the cafeteria with my girlfriend. The power went out in the building. And they told us it was a Con Ed failure. So we believed the fake news of the Con Ed failure, and we walked up, Christy, 30 something, I don't remember the exact floor, but 30 something flights of stairs back to our desks to go back to work. If you think, oh, it's a Con Ed failure, we're young, I'm in shape from step classes, because that's what we did back in the 90s, and let's get back to work. When I got back to the floor, that's when we could actually look out of the window at the World Trade Center that had been bombed, and I could see that people had smashed the windows, that there was smoke coming out of the tower, that there were helicopters. So by the way, this is the first bombing, not the
What year? 90.
92, not the
Okay.
one, not the 9/11 attacks. A lot
Right.
of people don't remember there was that first one that happened. And in my office, they were still working, and they expected me to sit down at my desk and go back to work. So I was like, bye, Felicia. I grabbed my purse. I was out of there. But when 9/11 happened, Christy, I remember being in that culture of you work no matter what. And when 9/11 happened, and people wonder, who are not in corporate, who do not work in New York City, why didn't they evacuate that second tower after the plane hit the first tower? And it was that mentality that I witnessed during the first bombing, that you just go back to work. You work. So that was such a moment for me when 9/11 happened, and I happened to be on maternity leave when 9/11 actually happened, but it could have been me that did not evacuate that. And I wasn't in the second tower, but it's the same thing, that by the grace of God, that's how close I could have been. And that was a culture that I decided I was going to reject, and I did not want to go back to it, and I didn't want any part of it anymore. So when after 9/11 happened, that was kind of like a huge sign from the universe to me, not to return to corporate life, and to find something that a more meaningful way to more meaningful way to pursue my passion in the world, and to do something in the world that would have more meaning for me.
Yeah, it's so true. I can remember 9/11, and I wasn't even in New York, but it really felt like we were about to fall off the edge.
And that's why right now it feels very similar. And this is a very defining moment in people's lives, where how we respond right now during this time, when you look back on it, it's going to define you. You're going to say how you act during this time, because at the other side of it, we don't know when this whole thing is going to end, but we do know it's going to end. And at the end of it, hopefully you're going to evolve by the end and be stronger and more resilient. So that's what reminds me so strongly about that time right now, is we're basically in another moment like that, where I remember post 9/11 New York was a very scary time, because we didn't want to ride the subways. We're afraid of a second attack. You had that fear, but you can't let the fear define you. You still have to move forward.
Yeah, it's so true. And fear, I mean, that fight or flight response that we have, fear can keep us frozen. And so how do we work through this? What were some of the strategies that you found in post 9/11 that maybe we could learn from this and apply those now?
Yeah, well, 9/11, what people used to do, for those who don't remember, it was like the watching of the burning of the towers over and over and over again. Were you
Oh
old enough to
yeah, it
remember
was
that? You're so young.
nonstop on the television for
Yeah,
weeks.
yeah. Right. So now it's the same thing. It's kind of like there's a tiger out there. Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt. Yes, there's a pandemic going on. There's something scary going on. But every time you turn on the news, it's kind of like peeking out of the cave and saying, is the tiger still there? Yeah, he's still there. Look how big and scary he is. Oh, and he's actually eating somebody, you know. So that's what it is. But at the same time, there's always things going on in the world. Like I remember when 9/11 happened, and so there was about 3,000 people who perished in the towers. And I remember somebody telling me, and I forget the exact news item, but, oh, did you know that wherever it was in the world that, several thousand people died in this earthquake or whatever it was, or this mudslide, or there, I mean, there's always things like that going on.
Hmm.
And for those of you who are listening are thinking, oh, no, this is different. Every day, I just heard this statistic, Christy, just the other day. Every day, 100,000 people die for whatever reason every day. But we're not sitting there watching the news saying, okay, today 6,000 people died of a heart attack and 10,000 people were hit in a car crash. And yet that's what a lot of us are doing every night. We're watching the news and we're looking at the numbers and making it mean something more than maybe it needs to mean. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally. Well, it's also like watching water boil. It's like,
Yeah.
people are looking at the case count and the death count and then the Dow Jones and the Nasdaq and like,
Right.
so what shall we focus on instead?
Okay, so I would say, first of all, if you're feeling anxiety, to limit your news consumption, like really think about what your news diet needs to be. And it's very addictive. Like my husband, I'll tell him, please tell me this isn't your third segment of CNN. He'll go from Anderson Cooper to Chris Cole, whatever his name is, like Chris Coleman's Basement. So, limiting your news diet, limiting other news sources. So my 22-year-old daughter took Facebook off of her phone because that constant source, it's not just the official source of the news, but then there is the even more anxious friend stream of a
Hmm.
version of the news, which can, people are expressing their worst fears right now. And you can really get sucked into that. So definitely limiting your news source.
And I think that, sorry to interrupt, I think that's
No,
great for all time. Like I
totally.
stopped watching the news like years ago and I
Yeah.
haven't missed it. I still can keep on top of what's going on, through looking at headlines or just peeking here and there, but definitely limiting it, especially during this time. I feel like I'm more in the news than usual,
Yeah.
but I can't imagine if, I had been in the news for years before, my consumption would be through the roof. So this is like also a consideration for moving into the future. Like,
Yeah. So limiting the news is
yes.
your news source. So it does not mean you have to delete your Facebook account, but consider taking it off your phone.
Oh
Consider
yeah.
taking any kind of news apps, whether that's Twitter, CNN. I'm sure all the news people have their own apps. Consider taking those all sorts of news off your phone. The second thing is, and this is would be very good, I think, for your audience, Christy, is to create before you consume. So
Mm-hmm.
that's something that I think is very important for us to do as human beings in general, is that we were born to create. That is really what's separate, and we've been doing it for thousands of years. There's art in the caves. So to create something before you consume, because that is going to give you tremendous feeling of empowerment And when you create something, it's a sense of control when you actually going through the process of creation. And that creation can take many different forms. It does not have to be a painting. It could be just baking cookies. That's a form of creation. It could be writing a page in your journal if you do journaling or morning pages. It doesn't have to be a masterpiece, is what I'm trying to say. Any kind of creation is going to make you feel more in control, more empowered.
Yeah, that is such a great point. And it's so funny because our last episode, we talked a lot about creativity. And so for those listening to this, go back and listen to that one as well and really take in that creativity. Like Miriam has a lot of tips around creativity. She's an artist, but we all have a creative life force. And we as human beings are, as you said, born to create.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going down. I didn't plan on doing the 5 tips or whatever, but we're up to number 3. You ready?
Good. This is
Okay,
good.
fine. All right, keep going, right? Number 3 would be affirmations. So as human beings, one of the greatest powers we have, and I'm sure you talk about this a lot on this podcast, Christy, because it's the Mind Muse podcast. One of the greatest powers we have as humans is the ability to choose our own thoughts. So using affirmations during this time to choose those more empowering thoughts are more important than ever. So, and by affirmations or mantras, I'm not talking about the yoga ones, just the words, but actually positive thought sentences that will help you.
Do you have a couple of affirmations that you do every day that you want to pass on?
Yeah, I have a list of 10 in my freebie.
Well, good.
Schulmanart.com/calm. You can actually grab 10 of my favorite affirmations right now.
Perfect. That's awesome.
Okay. All right. So that will give you, and some of them are probably really good ones that will help you, not just during this crisis, at any time, like that will really help you step into that moving forward. They're kind of like the Nike Just Do It affirmations, but none of them are just do it.
Good.
So, okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
Great.
And I'll put that link in the show notes for people.
Perfect. I was not planning on dropping that, by the way, but I'm so glad I got to.
It's perfect.
All right. Okay. So what are we up to? The third one is the first one is limit your news diet. The second one is create before you consume. The third one is affirmations. I would say that the fourth one is any kind of decluttering. Do you talk about that, Christy?
Oh yeah. Well, we had an organizer, professional organizer on episode 10 or 12. I could be wrong, but yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Okay.
It's an amazing thing to do.
Yeah. So by the way, we were talking before we hit record of what a messy person I am. So it's like, I am the last person to say I'm a very organized person, but even if you just organize your sock drawer or your underwear drawer, it gives you a tremendous feeling of control and empowerment over your environment, because we can control so little about what's going on in the world, not just now, but always. And to have control over your immediate environment can be very calming. So the act of doing it is calming, but also having a more clutter-free environment definitely lowers your stress.
Yeah. So I totally agree with this. And it's interesting just how freeing it is to be able to either donate or just remove it from your line of sight. It helps you think so much more clearly, more positively. It's an amazing practice.
So both of my children had to come home from college early. So they are 20 and 22. And one of the first things that they both did was they had all their stuff from their dorm, and their room was kind of full. So they each filled up a bag to give away to charity of clothes that they didn't want anymore, to make room for the things that they did want to make room for. So that decluttering can also help you spiritually declutter. I think what's really powerful is after you've decluttered something physically, to then declutter your mind by doing some sort of thought download or morning pages or whatever kind of journaling. Do you talk about that too, Christy?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about your morning pages too, for those that may not be familiar with that term.
Okay, so morning pages is from the Julia Cameron Artist Way technique. And she found that you really need to kind of clear off that dust off your brain before you can enter your creative practice. So artists who may have some sort of artist block or writer's block, she found that it was very powerful to begin the day with morning pages. I know that there are a lot of people who find journaling first thing in the morning a very powerful way to just clear off the brain, know what it is that you're thinking, so you kind of bring it up to the surface. It's kind of like popping that spiritual pimple so that you can see what's going on and then move on with your day. I find that journaling can be a very powerful way of, if you are ruminating on things or perseverating on negative thoughts, that once you clear it off your brain kind of says, okay, I know it's written down, I don't have to think about it anymore.
It's so true. So true.
Okay, so speaking of writing it down, so that just made me think of a fifth thing that helps with anxiety, and that is creating a schedule for yourself. So that is kind of a way of creating a plan for your day, but for the same reason that I just said about if you are ruminating on a negative thought, writing it down is a powerful way of kind of throwing it out into the world, getting rid of it. Is that if you have something to do, what your brain will do until you write it down, it will keep kind of replaying it over and over again. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, well, it's part of that little reptilian brain or the monkey brain that everyone talks about that's trying to keep you safe. And so it's probably your brain's probably like afraid you're going to forget.
Exactly. And then what happens, I don't know if you're familiar with David Allen's Getting Things Done.
Mhm.
That's where I first learned that what happens if you have something heinous to do in your day and you're imagining it, it's kind of like the experience if you're, and your listeners can experience this right now in this moment. If I tell you, okay, imagine yourself cutting a lemon and what that looks like and what that smells like, and think about the juice running over your fingers. And as I'm saying this, my mouth is starting to salivate. Is yours?
No, because I don't like lemon.
No, but it's like you get like that tart, like if you were to have a tart, not salivate like you want to eat it, but like
Right.
that you're starting to salivate because of that sourness, that if you were
Sure.
actually eating a lemon, what would happen to your mouth, right?
Mhm.
So what it is that your brain does not really distinguish between you're actually doing something and imagining something. So if you're imagining over and over again because you're thinking about, I have to write whatever it is, I have to write a blog post, or give me an example of something maybe negative that you have to do.
Uh, wait on hold, calling for something, you know.
Yeah, calling customer service.
Yeah.
I don't know, making an appointment. What happens is in your mind, you're experiencing it over and over and over again, almost as if it's really actually happening. The same way that if I were to try to describe you cutting a lemon, your mouth starts to salivate just as if it was actually happening. And that creates a lot of stress in your brain. So by writing it down, your brain thinks, oh, I don't have to think about this anymore. She wrote it down. I know it's going to happen at 3:00. I don't have to remind Miriam anymore that this is going to happen. So that is why writing down a schedule and keeping a schedule also keeps you calmer.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense.
You know, this has nothing to do with all the things we were going to talk about today during the
No, but it's
podcast,
great, isn't
right?
it? Yeah, I mean, these are interesting times, right?
Yeah.
Well, what are the two choices that people have in an aftermath like this? You know, there's some people who do this, and there's some people that do that. Like,
Yeah.
what's really at stake here? What is our choice? How do
All
we
right, so
react?
I will share like with my clients. So I coach artists, and I have very specific examples right now, right in front of me. It's kind of like the psychological zoo, you know, of what's happening. So I just spoke to one client this morning, who her practice involved teaching in person in her home studio and selling portraits. So I had reached out to her the other day. Hey, how you're doing? And she's saying, I'm doing great. I was like, really? We got to talk about this. She said she just transitioned her class over to Zoom. For the classes that included art supplies, she created like kits for her students. She puts them in a plastic bag. They prepay them. They pick it up from right outside. So she's figured it all out. You know, she says, I'm still getting portrait commissions and people are looking at their walls and they're thinking this doesn't look so good in their home, so they're shopping. And then I'll have another client who are like other clients who are paralyzed. And they're thinking those negative thoughts that nobody wants art at this time, and they believe it, and they can't motivate themselves to paint. So that's like what I said earlier, Christy. This is a time that can really define you. Right now, you may or may not have the gift of revenue, but you have the gift of time, and what you do with your time, this is your choice. And how you think about what's happening in the world, this is also your choice. You can choose to do nothing, or you can say, hey, this is the perfect time for me to work on my business, to put some systems in place, to create a new marketing plan that I didn't have time for. If you have the luxury of doing something creative, maybe this is the time that you work on that book you've been putting off, or now you have more time for painting, or whatever it is that you have the time to create something that never existed before.
Yeah, it's beautiful, really. And it's all about our thoughts and our beliefs. And are they
Yeah.
positive or are they negative?
Right. It's just, what do you make this mean right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen a lot of people on social media in the business world uh, worried or um, you know, needing to pivot, not really sure, paralyzed, and then others who are still thriving, and when you look back to the Depression, some millionaires were made during that time.
Yeah.
But you do have to have some empathy. There's people out there that are, you know, suffering, right? And so with your marketing and messaging, you don't want to sound tone deaf, right?
Right.
But no excuses, right? No
Yeah.
justification.
And also, I feel like it's a limiting belief to say that you're taking advantage of people during this time, because unless you've hoarded toilet paper and you're selling that at $50 a roll or whatever that, happens to be. I mean, I think I heard about some guy in Tennessee that got shut down. Did you hear about that story?
No.
There was this guy who had hoarded hand sanitizer, and he filled up his garage or something. I don't remember what state, so I don't want to badmouth the state, and it's like I falsely accused somebody. But this is a true story. The Amazon shut this guy down because he was jacking up the price of the hand sanitizer. He had like gone all around to the stores and bought it, and they shut him down. So unless you're doing something that's really evil, if you are providing a valuable service to people, like we were saying earlier, I want to pay someone to do my hair, and if you're willing to come to my house, yeah, hey, $200 or whatever you want, because I need it. I'm not going to pay for something I don't need. So if you're offering, and this is always true, Chrissy, this is true now, and it was true 2 months ago, you're offering something that people need, and you're offering it at a fair price, they're willing to pay for it. You are doing a disservice to the world by not offering something that fills somebody's need. And that need does not have to be toilet paper. It could be their need is because they want to feel good, and your art makes them feel good, or your music makes them feel good, or your art class makes them feel good. That's important too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you make such a good point. I mean, this coming from an artist, right? We have this thought in society that there's starving artists. But if you can figure it out in a time like this, you can sell your art anytime, any place. And it sounds
Yeah,
like some of your students really are. So
they are.
what is the psychology? Can you break it down? Like, what's the psychology of someone like that?
Well, a lot of the things, like the artist I spoke about, who's succeeding right now
Mhm.
during this time, a lot of the work that we had done together so she was somebody who was a one-on-one client and then joined my artist incubator group coaching program. And now she's back to one-on-one. It was about building her confidence and working on her mindset, which is why, Chrissy, what you're doing, the work that you're doing in the world is so important, because everything starts with managing our minds. And that's the work that you have to do first before you can succeed with your business in your life. It's not succeed with your business and then you'll be confident.
Right.
It has to be confidence first.
Totally.
And that courage is a muscle that you have to build by being willing to try things that may not work and figure it out as you
Yeah.
go. Not my client who I was talking about, she didn't have it all figured out. She was willing to experiment and see what happens and see where it goes, because she had developed that confidence over time to be willing to take risks and have things not quite work out every time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And that open-mindedness serves people really, really well. I mean, there was a VC guy that said the number one way that he could determine if someone was going to be successful is how open-minded they were. And it sounds like this lady that you're talking about, she's super open-minded, very open to inspiration and ideas that might come outside of her and internally as well, and willing to act on it, not just, oh, that's a good idea. And ideas are as fleeting as the wind, right? Unless you write it down and act, it does you no good.
Yeah. And it's
So
that whole thing that you have to act on them quickly before you talk yourself out of it too.
totally.
Right? You have to take that inspired action while it's available to you.
Totally. Yeah. So it sounds like courage, confidence, being bold, taking action, and not being afraid of failure. I mean, look at all the inventors. How many times did they fail at something before they innovated, before they
Yeah.
invented something, right?
Yeah. Creativity takes courage. That's a Matisse quote, because if you are doing something that you know is going to turn out, that doesn't take creativity. That's playing it safe.
It doesn't even take
So
courage, right? Yeah, it is
correct.
playing it safe.
Correct. So creativity takes courage, and then building a business takes even more courage,
Mm-hmm.
because you can paint for fun, and you're not making yourself vulnerable until you ask somebody to buy it. Opening yourself up for that. And as I say, and it's true of being an artist, but that's the same thing that is true of anybody who's building a business, which is why, Christy, I believe that building a business is probably the best self-development work that you can do. Do you agree
Totally.
with that?
Oh, totally. Yeah, there was someone that said, yeah, if you really want to take personal development seriously, first get married, then have kids,
Yeah, right.
and then start a business. Not
Yeah,
necessarily in that order, of course, no judgment, right? Whatever
right.
order. But like each one of those three things totally
Yeah.
can rock your world and create growth that you would have never imagined possible.
Right. I remember my grandfather used to say to me, so when I was in my early 20s, I didn't think I wanted to have children. And now, of course, you've heard I have two children. But my grandfather used to say, what are you going to do for aggravation? Like, because he thought that aggravation was necessary, and he's right. It is necessary. I feel, like those things in our life that we look at as the painful things, those are what defines us. This moment right now, this is a defining moment that we're living through, and it's going to define us.
Yeah, beautifully said. So I know you started your art business in post 9/11, and you thought that that was like the worst time that someone could possibly think about starting an art business. But what were some of those? What was the real impetus behind it? Like, were there some soul searching questions you were asking, or
Okay, here's what's so funny about that. I'm sorry, I have to cut in right away. Okay, so I was not thinking that at the time. It's only in retrospect, looking back, that I could have said that was the worst time to start a business. The same way people right now might be saying themselves, this is not a good time to start a business. But I didn't have those thoughts. I was just like, I'm doing it. So it
You're like,
was,
I'm rejecting this world that
that's
stays up
correct.
all night on their laptops, and I am doing something completely different.
That's correct. It was like I was rejecting the that you work when there's a terrorist attack going on, which seems like so ludicrous the way I was put it there. But it was exactly what was happened both in 1992 and in 2001.
Mm-hmm. So, what you mentioned when we were talking earlier before we started recording, about some of those soul searching questions that you asked yourself, or maybe if your future self, you right now, could go back in time and deliver to your past self. What are some of those questions?
Yeah. So I had always wanted to be an artist. I just didn't believe I could make a living from being an artist when I first took the whole path that led me to Wall Street. So this was something I always wanted to do, but I didn't have the belief that I could do it. And Christy, when I first decided I was not going back to Wall Street, it wasn't that I immediately jumped to the conclusion, oh, now I'm going to be an artist. So there were some things that I tried, and it's not that I failed at these other things I tried, but I was experimenting before I found my path. And my first thing I tried was to be a Pilates instructor. And it was during that experience when I was working for New York Sports Club and they were teaching me how to sell things because they wanted me to sell training packages. That's when I had my aha moment that like, oh, I could use the same sales techniques to sell my art. And I care more about my art than I did about training packages. So that's it. So it wasn't like I went out on a mountain and meditated and it's like, okay, now I'm going to be an artist. So there was like, and I know that sometimes I tell the story, I make it sound that way. Well, when 9/11 happened, that's when I decided to become an artist. And it really wasn't exactly such a clear cut path. When I first started selling, we had this conversation before, and I know that you wanted me to include this. I got my start mostly as a portrait artist. And that was something that I found people really wanted and were drawn to because, especially when people are feeling vulnerable, like in post 9/11, after the terrorist attack, people are feeling their mortality, which is something that I know people are feeling right now during this time.
Mm-hmm.
Do you agree with that?
Oh, totally. Yeah. Just looking at what's important and what's not, and reassessing values and where they've spent their time and where they want to spend their time in the future. Totally.
So selling portraits was almost like a no brainer, which saying it out loud, it almost feels like, really? But people wanted to preserve their life after death, their mortality. So it was creating a sense of immortality for themselves and their children by capturing that moment in time. But I feel also what's so important, Christy, is for people who are in creative art pursuits, that during this time, it is also an existential crisis that's going on for people. It's not just a health crisis
Mm-hmm.
because we're feeling our own sense of mortality right now. So that is why right now people need art more than ever. People need music more than ever. They need these creative expressions more than ever because that's how we make sense of our world.
Yeah. And I had a previous guest that also would agree with you and said that it helps us connect with our souls and to have a divine connection.
Exactly. Exactly. Because it's kind of like art and music is what makes meaning in life. And right now, when you're having an existential crisis, when you're having a pandemic where we don't feel safe in the world, it helps us feel connected to life. It helps us feel connected to each other.
Yeah. I also noticed too, the word pandemic, it's like, just take out the NDEM and it's a panic. It's a global panic,
Oh my gosh, right.
you know?
Yes.
And it's a panic in every way. I mean, when you can really go inward, um, then you can be calm and you can be still and you can reflect. But if up until now you've been very externally motivated or externally distracted with the soccer games or the theater or the movies or whatever, and then all of a sudden that's all cut out, what are you left with? You're left with you. And some
Yeah,
of us haven't spent that time just with ourselves, just with our family, and really being present and mindful of the moment.
that's so true. That's so powerful.
And I hope that this time, this time of rest that we really are all are having, um not, some of we're still working, right? We're still working from home. I don't mean it that way. I just mean a rest from all the other hustle and bustle, that we can take that forward and really create a new world after we're out of this. It's like a rebirthing of who we want to be, what we want to value, um, what we're here to do. And like you're saying, people are looking at their own mortality, right? It's kind of like if you were on your deathbed, what would you be regretting that you didn't do? And
Right. And it's not extra episodes of Tiger King.
no, it's not. That's another distraction from the real work, right?
Exactly. We tried. Did you watch that yet?
No.
No. We tried it, and I was like, "Oh my God, I don't see what people see in this show." And my son reported back, "No, you had to give it an extra 10 minutes." I was like, "I don't think so."
To each their own, right?
Right.
Well, it was a pleasure to have you here today, Miriam. Can you please tell people how they can get to know you and your work a little bit better? And then why don't you also finish us off with your final thought or final message?
Yes, thank you, Christy. So it was definitely a pleasure being here, and I really enjoyed our conversation. So first of all, if you wanted that list of 10 affirmations, you can grab that at schulmanart.com, schulmanart.com/calm. I hope you have a good editor, good audio editor.
No, yeah, no worries. It'll be in the
Okay.
show notes.
Okay, it'll be in the show notes. And so that I just ask for, your email. It's totally free though. But without even giving your email, if you're a podcast listener, if you like what I had to say today, please come find me. I have the Inspiration Place podcast. It is for creatives. We talk about not how to paint though. We talk about how to manage your mind, because it takes a tremendous lot of courage, as we said, to be a creative person. And I do bring on a lot of business experts onto my podcast as well. So we talk about how to build your business as well as how to manage your mind around that.
Love it. Great. All right. And what's your final thought? Let's leave everyone on a high note.
Yes. So I think what's really important for everyone to remember is that knowing what gives a lot of anxiety right now is you don't know what's going to happen. But the truth is, in general, it's really a false sense of security that we know what's going to happen week to week. We never know what's happening week to week. That is something, a reality that you have to accept, that the only moment you can be sure of is right now, the present moment. So when you feel yourself sliding into anxious thoughts, bring yourself into this present moment. Focus on your breath. If you don't like to do affirmations, that's fine, but you just can focus on breathe in, breathe out, bring yourself right into the present moment, because that's the only thing we can ever be sure of.
Thank you, Miriam.
Oh, thank you.